in the US, but really not about Japan. And when I then, years later, first read the book, Pachinko, there was this moment of recognition again. But at that time, 4 years ago, it was very hard to sell any project that had all Asian-led cast. That was a period piece that required a certain budget level. And definitely that was in Korean, Japanese, and English languages. That was almost unheard of. So now where we are, with Parasite, which is an amazing film, Minari, Squid Game, of course, I feel like our timing is appropriate. But when we first started the project, it was unusual.
Right. And I got to say, I mean, your market intelligence, having spent so much time at WME, you knew the landscape. What gave you confidence that it was worth pressing forward, not just to get maybe additional meetings or bids, but to press for the kind of budget that would allow you to tell the story in this way?
Well, for one, the only way that it could be told in the way that we were envisioning it is that it did need to have scale and scope. So I'm a big believer, from my time at WME being an agent, that the most personal stories and the specific ones typically feel the most universal. Director Bong Joon-ho from Korea also talks about that a lot, and I'm a big believer in that, always have been in my career in business. And I felt that this story told by our showrunner, Soo Hugh, and later our directors and our cast really hit home with that. But I do believe that my time when I was at WME and being an agent, my job is to understand the marketplace, and it's also to understand what kinds of creative projects could resonate. And while this had all the potential hardships and challenges, I did believe that our showrunner's vision for it at that time felt incredibly transportable. And I think the story transports you. And ultimately, it's a story about family, and it's about the sacrifices that one generation makes for the next. And I just believe that this would have been, the audiences were ready for this.
Was it evident to you when you first met with Apple that kind of conversation was going to be different?
I did. They had recently opened their doors to buying new projects, and they had yet to release shows and films. So it was early days of Apple, and I'm so excited for their Oscar weekend with Coda. And I think that they're just continually just really hitting the cultural resonance with their projects. But we had a couple executives there who understood the show intrinsically. There's an executive there named Michelle Lee. She's Asian American. She understood it. She's also a child of immigrants herself. And Zach Van Amberg and Jamie Ehrlicht, who run the service. Zach's wife had actually known about the book by the time we had pitched it. And he felt very compelled by the show as well, and just felt it was very universal. So we feel very lucky that Apple understood it. Coincidentally, we did have 4 other offers when we took it out to the market, and we just felt Apple was ultimately the best home for it. And they've been incredible supporters since.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Fascinating. And of course, Coda made a lot of news recently, as you said, with Best Picture. I wonder if you can briefly talk about what you think Apple's aspirations are in not only telling diverse stories, but trying to do it with polish and maybe some of the economics behind it. There's been a lot of discussion about how Squid Game changed the game from being able to hire talent that maybe was not as expensive and then being able to monetize it all around the world as well.
As it relates to Apple, I think you'd have to ask them about what their aspirations are. What I always feel for them is that they really care about creativity, and they care about real artist stories that come from a personal place and a passionate place. At least that's been my experience working with them the last few years. So we've just found them to be great partners every step of the way. And they've actually been very supportive on a creative level, because again, this show, having never really been done before, there are other places that maybe could have been more stringent creatively, but they actually gave us a lot of breathing room.
Right. I have to imagine in the time you were developing this, as you said, we had Squid Game come along, and somewhere in there was Crazy Rich Asians, and then
Yes.
Parasite and Minari, and you guys must have been saying to yourself, for whatever reason, the entire marketplace is moving to us.
You know, I've been waiting 20 years for the culture to catch up with my personal taste. Definitely when I was an agent, I would put together projects for my clients, and I always thought, oh, this one may not land. You know, the culture's not ready yet, unfortunately. And I believe that we are here now. And I do think it's because of these OTT streaming platforms that have equalized the playing field in some way. You know, Korean cinema has been excellent for decades. It's just now that people are able to take notice because of access through OTTs. So I'm very grateful for that, but it's why I've had confidence in Korean cinema, filmmaking, music, and Korean dramas. Korean dramas actually have been popular in the community for many decades. So I think for the other producers and myself, we're all cinephiles. My father owned video stores, and my parents were working all the time. So I watch a lot of movies. So I feel like I've had the greatest filmmakers were my babysitters in some ways. And when you grow up loving film and you grow up knowing about Korean cinema and Korean dramas and Korean artistry, this wasn't a surprise to us, weirdly. We were just waiting for the world to catch up, if that makes sense.
Right. No, that makes sense. I mean, the evolution was happening. I have to imagine you agree, though, that the pandemic, I mean, just put fuel on top of that fire in that it sent people home in search of new stories, and force them to discover things that we're not going to reverse. We're going to look back at that period 20 years from now and talk about what a game changer it was for Hollywood, right?
I believe so. I think with the pandemic, with viewership being at an all-time high, I think that opened up moments for people to discover new things. And I think, you know, Parasite, Squid Game, and I definitely feel that way about Pachinko, they feel very universal. They're deeply Korean, but they also feel incredibly, wherever you're from, you can relate to what those characters are struggling with. I think with Pachinko, it's very much about a family. It's about multiple generations. I think when you watch it, we hope that you think about calling a family member or thinking about them. And, you know, you mentioned Crazy Rich Asians earlier. When we were just about to pitch it, we knew that Crazy Rich Asians was about to release, and we were really hoping it was going to work. Because if you look at the history of Asian-led cast major studio films, so almost 30 years ago, there was Joy Luck Club, and that was a success. And then it took another 25 to 26 years for another major studio to make Crazy Rich Asians. They're very different in subject matter, of course, but it took that long for another studio to invest in an all Asian-led cast. And so we were praying that that would work. Even though Crazy Rich Asians and Pachinko are different stories as well, it was important in the marketplace if it was going to work. And I believe if Pachinko is continually successful, it'll open up other kinds of stories for other producers and filmmakers to tell. Unfortunately, we're still building on our own narratives in the Hollywood marketplace, but I do feel Hollywood in general and audiences in general are more open to different kinds of stories now, and who play those leads.
That's funny. I hadn't thought that far back to Joy Luck Club, but that's incredible. Do you think it was because the stories were not being written, or was there always a population of screenwriters who had those ideas, but there was just no receptivity from the marketplace?
I definitely think it's the latter. I think that there's been so many artists, Asian American artists, and other diverse artists who've been wanting to tell these stories. I've heard many of them, and they weren't able to get made. Now, both of our directors, Koganada and Justin Chan, they come from the independent film space. So they've actually been telling a lot of stories and films already about Asian Americans and different stories, but outside of the major studio system or outside of the major streamer system. Now, some of their films ended up getting acquired by major studios, which is great, but there has not been a lack of desire and lack of interest in telling these stories from filmmakers. So I feel now is more of a moment to get those stories made.
Right. I mean, and
And
again, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add that, I've dedicated a career over the last several years and my future to, I always talk about how do you take something that feels foreign and make it feel familiar? Growing up Asian American, oftentimes you feel like an outsider. And my life's work is at my production company and my management company is really taking what someone might consider not part of you and making that feel familiar.
Right. No, that's definitely been a hallmark of the work that's increasingly being done. Speaking of which, talk about your aspirations for Blue Marble and what kinds of stories you want to be telling in the year or two ahead.
Definitely stories about the human spirit. We always talk about what is this saying about the human condition. A lot of my clients have those conversations as well. I do tend to respond to things that, is it artistic, but is it also commercial? Does it have the ability to hit a mainstream audience? And those are definitely the kinds of clients I tend to gravitate towards as well. There's something artful about their approach, and as an artist, they have something to say, but they also have a desire to impact a large audience. And so I think the things you'll see from Blue Marble over the next few years is things that definitely hit that tone. And my company's name is called Blue Marble, and it's inspired by the name of the famous photo of Earth from the 1970s that was taken out of a space shuttle. And at the time when I launched the company, it was 2 years ago at the start of the pandemic. In Los Angeles, I remember there were helicopters circling my house, and it was during the protest for Black Lives Matter. And I was just thinking about our world is continually transforming. And when that photo of the Blue Marble was taken in the 70s, that also was a transformative time in our country. And when you look at that photo, it's really about the story. I wanted to tell stories that connect us and unite us. And when you look at that photo of Earth, we're actually all in this journey together. And what I am very excited about is what are the frontiers ahead of us? What are the stories ahead of us? Where are we going as humans? And at the core of that, the storytelling really needs to feel intimate and specific.
I totally understand where you're coming from. The way you describe the kind of clients you've been drawn to reminds me, I was just going through Riz Ahmed, Ryan Coogler, Gal Gadot. I just wonder, as for your own story, how you could have easily gone on being a high-powered agent with an A-list client base. Can you just talk about what it was like? I mean, I don't want to say walking away from it, but definitely changing course.
Yes, I mean, of course it's, at that time, I felt this desire to be closer to the storytelling process. I've always wanted to produce when I was an agent, and I really wanted to, I think there's nothing more powerful than story. I think, Carl, you also work in a world of storytelling. And if we, when I was working at my dad's video stores as a kid, I learned so much about different kinds of people through films. And I'm a big believer that Hollywood can also export empathy. And I think, leaving one career, everything I do now as a producer and as a manager is built foundationally on what I learned as an agent. And I actually think it gives me my own strength and my own superpower in some ways. That's different from other producers, and other producers have different strengths and superpowers. But yes, while it was very tough for me personally to leave, they're all still my friends. I mean, all my colleagues that I've worked with for 17 years, I still have so much kinship with them, and I still rely on them. And my former clients, my desire definitely is to find projects with them as well, because I know a lot of their tastes and what kind of things that they want to do and messages they want to share. So to me, it's literally just another extension of those relationships. But I don't feel like I've left them behind, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What about best advice to those who work in mailrooms and want to get ahead? What would you say?
Stay curious and always follow your instinct. If there's something that, I say this to my clients as well over the years, whenever someone shares an idea with me, I'm like, that's really hard. You know, artists are so used to hearing that's not going to sell, that's not going to work. But whenever a client or artist or a young person would say to me, I'm really thinking about this, it's staying with me, you know, I can't stop getting it out of my head, I always say, write that one or go after that one, because it's really, there's something specific about it that's hitting that artist, that those are the ones that tend to resonate, I found, not just in the marketplace, but with audiences. So that's how I would say, go with your gut.
Yeah, their success is because they are hard to a large degree. Finally, we've been asking all of our guests and our EPs and showrunners about content budgets, which is a huge topic for us here at CNBC as we sort of evaluate the companies. And I wonder if you think we're entering a period where budgets get more disciplined, where the streamer budgets get cracked down for a variety of reasons, competition, cost management, or is the demand so inelastic that it's going to continue the way it has the last few years?
I think this is just my personal feeling. I think that streamers ultimately are, it's not an everlasting budget. They're, you know, even though the content arm of a media company or a different company in the streaming world, they have specific budgets. And to think that they're going to spend irresponsibly, you know, or to overspend, I don't think that's going to be the case. I do think there's still going to be shows and films with majorly high budgets, but the concept and the production team has to justify that in the storytelling. So I think, you know, larger genre pictures or films may continue to get that budget, but it has to be warranted. I don't think, I think that all these streamers are spending responsibly, if that makes sense, based on the idea. Yeah.
Right. And then do we have news on a season 2?
We're really hopeful that it's going to happen because we have so much more story to tell. And we hope to have that news shortly.
You're going to have a lot of excited viewers if and when it happens. But we'll encourage everyone to take a look, and I continue to dig through it myself. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you.